A Dangerous Dysfunction. By Paul Krugman. Unless some legislator pulls off a last-minute double-cross, healthcare reform will pass the Senate this week. Count me among those who consider this an awesome achievement. It's a seriously flawed bill. We'll spend years if not decades fixing it, but it's nonetheless a huge step forward. It was, however, a close-run thing. And the fact that it was such a close thing shows that the Senate, and, therefore, the U.S. government as a whole, has become ominously dysfunctional. After all, Democrats won big last year, running on a platform that put health reform front and center. In any other advanced democracy this would have given them the mandate and the ability to make major changes. But the need for 60 votes to cut off Senate debate and end a filibuster, a requirement that appears nowhere in the Constitution, but is simply a self-imposed rule, turned what should have been a straightforward piece of legislating into a nail-biter. And it gave a handful of wavering senators extraordinary power to shape the bill. Now consider what lies ahead. We need fundamental financial reform. We need to deal with climate change. We need to deal with our long-run budget deficit. What are the chances that we can do all that, or, I'm tempted to say, any of it, if doing anything requires 60 votes in a deeply polarized Senate? Some people will say that it has always been this way, and that we've managed so far. But it wasn't always like this. Yes, there were filibusters in the past, most notably by segregationists trying to block civil rights legislation. But the modern system, in which the minority party uses the threat of a filibuster to block every bill it doesn't like, is a recent creation. The political scientist Barbara Sinclair has done the math. In the 1960s, she finds, extended debate-related problems threatened or actual filibusters, affected only 8% of major legislation. By the 1980s, that had risen to 27%. But after Democrats retook control of Congress in 2006 and Republicans found themselves in the minority, it soared to 70%. Some conservatives argue that the Senate's rules didn't stop former President George W. Bush from getting things done. But this is misleading, on two levels. First, Bush-era Democrats weren't nearly as determined to frustrate the majority party, at any cost, as Obama-era Republicans. Certainly, Democrats never did anything like what Republicans did last week. GOP senators held up spending for the Defense Department, which was on the verge of running out of money, in an attempt to delay action on health care. More important, however, Mr. Bush was a buy-now-pay-later president. He pushed through big tax cuts, but never tried to pass spending cuts to make up for the revenue loss. He rushed the nation into war, but never asked Congress to pay for it. He added an expensive drug benefit to Medicare, but left it completely unfunded. Yes, he had legislative victories, but he didn't show that Congress can make hard choices and act responsibly, because he never asked it to. So now that hard choices must be made, how can we reform the Senate to make such choices possible? Back in the mid-1990s, senators Tom Harkin and, believe it or not, Joe Lieberman, introduced a bill to reform Senate procedures. Management wants me to make it clear that in my last column I wasn't endorsing inappropriate threats against Mr. Lieberman. 60 votes would still be needed to end the filibuster at the beginning of debate, but if that vote failed, another vote could be held a couple of days later requiring only 57 senators, then another, and eventually a simple majority could end debate. Mr. Harkin says that he's considering reintroducing that proposal, and he should. But if such legislation is itself blocked by a filibuster, which it almost surely would be, reformers should turn to other options. Remember, the Constitution sets up the Senate as a body with majority, not supermajority, rule. So the rule of 60 can be changed. A Congressional Research Service report from 2005, when a Republican majority was threatening to abolish the filibuster so it could push through Bush judicial nominees, suggests several ways this could happen. For example, through a majority vote changing Senate rules on the first day of a new session. Nobody should meddle lightly with long-established parliamentary procedure. But our current situation is unprecedented. America is caught between severe problems that must be addressed and a minority party determined to block action on every front. Doing nothing is not an option, not unless you want the nation to sit motionless, with an effectively paralyzed government, waiting for financial, environmental and fiscal crises to strike.